Everyone, welcome back to Manufacturing Hub. If you guys are watching us live, it's hopefully a beautiful Wednesday afternoon. Although I suppose if you're not in sunny Southern California like Benson, it's probably a cold Wednesday afternoon if you are anywhere in North America. Having said that, everyone, welcome back to Manufacturing Hub. Or if you guys are new here and have followed Benson in, welcome to Manufacturing Hub for the first time. We are very excited to go continue our technology modernization within manufacturing theme. If you guys missed it last week, Vlad and I, we at least attempted to. We at least attempted to start the conversation of how do we bring these concepts like industrial AI and digital transformation and Industry 4.0, the boardroom conference conversations that we have down to the plant floor. If you guys were watching last week, tell us how good of a job that we did. It felt like a gargantuan task. This week, we're going to break it down a little bit. We've got Benson back on, and we're going to focus very much on the hardware side. So as we said on this, how do we go from 80s to AI? We're going to focus on the hardware this time and continue watching Manufacturing Hub on this theme. Next week, we're getting into industrial data, industrial AI. And then I'm hoping we wrap it all back up in 2 weeks. And then we're going to go hit ProveIt, and then we're going to go see industrial AI, hopefully in reality. So if you guys are watching along, please feel free to say hi in the chat. Please feel free to go ask questions to Benson or Vlad or myself. But without further ado, everyone officially welcome to Manufacturing Hub. This is episode 244. I want to welcome Benson back on the show. Benson, thank you so much for being here.
Happy to be here, guys. Good to be with you again.
Absolutely. Thank you, Benson, for agreeing to come back on. Before we obviously dive into the conversation, I think it is very good to get the background of our guest. And you've been on several episodes, but I do want to ask you for a brief reintroduction for those who may not have seen you in the past.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I've been around a while. I will say that. I've been at Opto for about 30 years. And prior to that, I actually was largely an entrepreneur. So I'd started a number of businesses. Probably the one that, kind of crafted my path, my journey more than anything was a computer consulting business I had in the late 80s and early 90s before I came to Opto, which I came to Opto in 95. So it was kind of in that turmoil of everything about PCs and focused mostly on creating networks and teaching people software. And just to give you an example, and it kind of dates me a bit, I was teaching people how to use software applications like WordPerfect, Lotus 123, DBase 3, and then ultimately DBase 4. So those are the kind of the experience I had. And as I said on previous shows, I've bumped into a musician friend who introduced me to the world of controls. And really what was interesting about, and why I made a switch from strictly IT type consulting to controls, was the company he was working with was Opto. And there was this convergence of basically like hybrid type controls where we saw a lot of PC based type technology coming into traditional controls technology. So this overlap, or Venn diagram, if you will, kind of was this overlap that was really intriguing to me. And as an entrepreneur, and it was kind of like, oh, really? You want to go work for a company like Opto? And I was like, well, yes. And the reason is because Opto is a very different company. I had an opportunity to come on board, and the management style and the way that the company operates gives you a lot of autonomy. In other words, a way for me to kind of exercise that entrepreneurial spirit and really start thinking outside the box and what kind of things we could do to move the industry forward, and kind of to the theme of modernization. So this was early in the 90s. But prior to that, and this is something I haven't shared with you guys before, while in college, I was working on a research project, and it was actually a market research project. And I was actually loading siding for a siding warehouse onto these guys' trucks. And I had to ask them, market research questions. What did you dislike most about your job? Mm-hmm. And it came down to they hated hanging these things called gable vents that go up in the gables of homes. So as they run the siding up, it was really a challenge. So I was taking all these notes and I built basically a business plan around it. And I thought, I can make a vent that will solve all their problems. And I did. So I created a manufacturing line in my garage where I took raw coils of aluminum, 24-inch by 50-foot rolls, and bent the aluminum, built the frames, and literally created a product for them that started flying off the shelves. So it was really my first foray into this notion of manufacturing efficiency, bringing raw material in, bringing it around into a finished product and shipping it to customers. So you blend that notion of making something as
Mhm.
manufacturers really overstating it. I was doing it out of my garage and I had, 2 other workers with me, but still that concept combined with, the stuff I've been doing in computers and technology was really how the pieces kind of came together and landed me here at Opto.
That is super interesting, right? And I can tell you, at least like personally, I have talked to a number of individuals who have started similar, if you want to call them side hustles or small
Mhm.
businesses, but nowadays it's all done via 3D printing, right? If you have an
Right.
interesting or novel idea, maybe you can not necessarily patent it, but design it, print it, and then sell it on Etsy or a more professional type of a platform. I think it is super interesting to I would say like find out about such projects. And a lot of times, again, it's either people who have gone into manufacturing following, I guess, having done something like that, or maybe do manufacturing and then on a smaller scale start to produce something on the side. But that's an interesting story. I had not known that. And this is
Yeah,
before I'm
it's
assuming 3D printing, so you have to manufacture
oh,
everything using
I went
super
through a lot
interesting.
of aluminum until I got the prototype correct, and then, naturally, as you would do in any type of product development, you'd get some of those first articles, you'd take them, still loading siding. "Oh, hey, guys, remember when you said, you were unhappy with the vents you were using? How about this one?" And they look
Mhm.
at it, and they tried it, and they said, "Hey, we love this. Can you tweak this? Can you tweak that?" And yes, no 3D printing, more aluminum, bending, and
Yep.
building frames and so on until I got it right. And it's funny you bring up patents because that's ultimately what shut down my business. One of the
Mhm.
large, companies in the area who were making these vents, not good ones, but nonetheless selling a lot of them, I really ate into their business. And so they
Mhm.
slapped me with a patent lawsuit. And I was like, "Hey, I'm just a college kid. I'm doing this out of my garage. If you buy all my equipment, take it out of here, I'll walk away." And that's exactly what I did. I learned a lot in the process. I enjoyed it. It was a lot of fun, but I had other fish to fry. So,
It is super interesting. Again, I'll say it again, and I think I guess I wish there were more documentation for smaller businesses starting
right.
from ground up. There was a YouTube video recently from one of those engineering type of YouTubers, Mike Grover, I believe his
Mhm.
name, but he built basically and I guess the premise was what does it take to manufacture? It was like a barbecue scrubber in the
Right.
US, right? And so he went out and pretty much did the entire supply chain of obviously the bristles, the handle, the scraper, and then
Yeah.
built it in the US because I think it's also to a degree the end user, right, or the customer that's buying those products doesn't always understand what does it take to build it here on in North American soil versus buying it in China for let's say $2 to $5, and what it truly takes as a skill, as a process, as again like supply chain. He was having a lot of trouble sourcing the different materials as well, so it's super fascinating, I would say, on the small scale especially, right, because obviously large manufacturers have a different dynamic. But
Right. You don't get the benefit of scale and, buying a lot you're buying just a few parts here and there to get it right, and you don't get those, lower costs as you buy in bulk and things like that. But no
I'll
question
find that
it's
video.
challenging.
Mhm.
No question it's challenging, and, we do that here at Opto. You guys know what we make, but for your audience, we make industrial controllers, edge devices, IO, and so on, and we make it all right here. I'm looking out the window to our manufacturing facility. So, we know it at obviously a very large
Yep.
scale. Thankfully, we've been doing it for 50 years, so, but we're very vertically integrated. So, when you talk about something like that YouTube video and the difficulty of lining all those pieces up, something we live every day. We've got a great team that knows how to do it well.
Mhm.
But no question about it, manufacturing here in the U.S. gives us enormous capabilities relative to quality, supply chain integration, and so on. But then there's also the fact that it's just built right here in the USA.
Yep.
And it gives us an amazing opportunity to support it over the long term and not rely on somebody else to contract manufacturing or whatever. But to your point, it is complicated.
Yep. Absolutely. Let me cue us into the first question of the theme that lines up very well with your comment of manufacturing in the US, right? And you've obviously seen a lot of different, I would say, ups and downs in the manufacturing industry as a whole. I think that we sometimes, again, as maybe integrators or those that talk about manufacturing, are in certain bubbles. So I'm curious, Benson, from your perspective, what does the industry look like? Is there a wide gap between, the bleeding or cutting edge manufacturers and, sort of the small to medium sized manufacturers? Like, what are you seeing on the plant's floor today?
Absolutely. There is no question a very wide gap between between somebody getting started or even a well-established small, medium-sized business in terms of manufacturing technology. Uh, you know,
Mhm.
Contrast that against some of the big behemoths out there who are have everything automated. We were involved with the state of Indiana for several years, working with the state to bolster manufacturing in that state. So they put some programs together and stuff to kind of get people started with some of the technologies I'm sure we're going to talk about
Mhm.
through this podcast. And I did a lot of walkthroughs, a lot of manufacturing plants and so on, and it was striking how many of them so many of them are still a lot of very manual processes or very
Mhm.
siloed machines that yeah, we push this button, the machine does that, and that's it. There's no other visibility on that system. There's not really any kind of plant floor integration, but that machine does what it's supposed to do. And to that point, a lot of, when you start talking about, oh, well, what about digital transformation and applying some new technologies? You invariably get, hey, that thing isn't broken. It does what its job. We're not getting anywhere near the controls or connecting to that machine because we really don't have a need to, or we don't understand what the long term benefit is. That's just all part of a journey that any manufacturer is going to go through. So to your point, yeah, there's a lot of that. And then you get into some other plants where, a lot of stuff is very integrated, or it's not quite integrated at a data level, maybe at a controls level, but not at a data level. And that's kind of the challenge that we're seeing with a lot of people who are embarking on this notion of digital transformation, is how you make that integration happen.
Let me ask a follow up before I pass the um, mic to Dave. I am curious, I guess, like, what do you think is the bottleneck that leads to those challenges? I'm assuming that those manufacturers probably bring some groups in to evaluate what it would take to modernize or automate certain areas. But is it a
Mhm.
lack of uh, capital, or I guess, is it very expensive for them? Is it a lack of people being able to come in and integrate those systems? Is it a lack of technical solutions on the market that are suitable for them? Like, what do you think is kind of the biggest factor? Is it all of them? I'm just curious what your thoughts are.
I would say it's the first 2 for sure. So that those present challenges: capital availability, really having a plan about what you want to do, and really focus on some of the outcomes, and then
Mhm.
sometimes just the size of such an effort. Getting everybody on board. We've always said it's people, technology, and processes. There's a lot of pieces that have to come together, so that can be a challenge. I wouldn't say there's generally a lack of technical solutions. However, they tend to be pretty sporadic. In other words, there's a lot of different technologies. We'll see it at the ProveIt conference coming up. We see it at other events. And it's really, well, how do I mesh all these together to achieve the desired result? And so that becomes, this jigsaw puzzle of figuring out which technologies will work together to achieve those outcomes. And that can lead to a pretty high degree of paralysis. You don't want to make the wrong choice. You certainly don't want to get into a vendor locked in situation, but then you kind of tend to move that way because you need a single throat to choke if something doesn't go right. There's all those elements that come in. So it is a challenge, but we generally have been fortunate enough to work with a lot of companies that have overcome some of those initial challenges, and their approach is to start small, right? To identify a problem first. So, sometimes we see companies as Just like, oh, we got to get a UNS, or we got to do digital transformation because the boss says we have to.
Hmm.
And we always push back on that. When it's okay, we can help you with that, or our system integrators can help you with that. But let's identify that real problem you're trying to solve. Where's the bottleneck? Where's the one thing you wish you had? What's the one thing that's holding you up from taking another step? And let's focus on that and eke out a win. Show some benefit, some value, and again, some sort of outcome. And that allows, you to start to build and gain the confidence of all those people involved. They're all in the same boat. They're all moving forward. And then you can start to take some of those necessary steps to, go a little bit more widespread. And it also becomes important to try to nail down the kind of technologies that you want to apply that does avoid things like vendor lock-in. Using open technologies, stuff that's available, that has a wide knowledge base. A lot of that is modern frameworks that we're hearing a lot about today, and not getting caught up in some of those old ways of doing things. Hey, those still work. Don't get me wrong, but if you're really trying to get on a path for really democratizing data and applying things that are important in a plant floor like cybersecurity, you really got to get the right tools put together at a baseline and build from there.
Do I get to go, Vlad?
I have many follow-ups, but Dave.
Okay, so you almost let me go ask Benson a question at 12 minutes, which would have been the fastest I've ever been able to ask Benson any of the times he's been on. This is particularly average, so thank you, Vlad. Benson, lots of ground that you just covered, but going and kind of continuing on the technology theme, you had mentioned kind of starting at a proof of concept. You've been at Opto long enough. Opto's been involved in a large number of these proof of concepts. Are you seeing more and more of these proof of concepts going broader scale? Are you seeing their struggle to be adoption, maybe because leadership hasn't bought into the need or value to invest in the upgraded technology and hardware? What are you seeing kind of after that proof of concept stage?
Right. And so we all know the term for that. It's proof of concept purgatory, POC purgatory, right? And we see both, to be frank. So, and where we've seen most success is when it's driven from leadership, right? Now, that's not to say if you're an engineer in a plant and you've got a terrific idea and you want to try to, carve out a quick POC, that's great, especially if you can do it at low cost, maybe with trial software, things like that. We know we love Ignition. It's a classic example. I can load that on a PC. I can start connecting to some devices and show some value at very low cost. And then you take that concept and you sell it up the chain, which is always a challenge. I'm not going to lie. But if you get that corporate buy-in, it's remarkable what it can do. There's actually a customer we work with. I can't name them because they're very very competitive, especially against Chinese manufacturers. But they build products largely in the automotive space, and that's exactly what this particular person did. Is he kind of created an environment, a POC, showed some value of connecting to some of his machines, and essentially took that all the way to the CEO. And the CEO immediately recognized the value of it and literally, well, not literally, but close to it, gave him a blank check. Says, yes, I've got 8 different plants around here, all full of machines. This makes sense. What do we got to do to make that happen? So you can kind of see it from both sides, but at the end of the day, the ones that have been most successful are the ones that have the buy-in, and maybe not just from the CEO or the engineering manager or production supervisor, but everybody understands what the outcomes will be for the organization, not just for your line or not just for your little corner of the manufacturing floor. So that's a big part of it. It's the people part is really important.
Agreed. No, the people part is something that we will never be able to automate out, if only because we'll need some people to come in to update that automation to whatever the next generation of automation is. Talking about automation, there has been more and more talk and chat about industrial AI. We're going to the ProveIt conference, all of us, in a couple or 3 weeks. We'll talk a bit more about that shortly, but everyone is talking about industrial AI. And a large part of the industrial AI is we need data, and a large part of the data is we have to upgrade hardware, we have to add sensors, we have to add more controllers or more IO modules or a whole bunch of other things so that we can go create this data. Are you seeing people interested in upgrading hardware? Are you seeing people mostly just happy that they have PLCs that have continued to work for the last 50 years and maybe adding additional layers of hardware? What are you seeing? What sort of conversations are you having, Benson?
So I'll break this into two camps. There's really the notion of the brownfield environments. These are existing systems that are working great. And then there's the notion of greenfield environments where we're going to bring on a whole separate section of the manufacturing. Maybe it's a new line, but generally that new line, to your terrific post earlier today on LinkedIn, Vlad, sometimes it's a new line bringing it in with some other lines. But in general, what we've seen is that it really does kind of cover the gamut. There's a lot of people that are looking to apply new technologies to gain that kind of data, because let's take a step back. You mentioned AI. We all use AI. I'm sure all of us do in one form or another. Maybe it's just, hey, where can I find this pair of shoes? Through ChatGPT, all the way to, hey, help me write this paper. But what do we all suffer from with AI? It's hallucinations, right? Because AI is built on essentially a data set, which is what's available on the internet today. And for that reason, there's a lot of different sources of truth. There's, so essentially AI fills in the gaps and hallucinates. We can't tolerate that in an industrial setting. We simply cannot. We spent a lot of time here at Opto working with AI over the past several years, and we run into the same problem, whether it's your own LLMs, whether you're using other agents, whatever. It's that challenge, and we can't have that in industrial. So it does come down to the sanctity of the data. Are you getting modeled, contextualized data that these AI agents can understand? And how do you kind of box them in to only work within your domain and not pull in extraneous data from other sources leading you astray? So the data integrity is absolutely critical if you're going to apply AI in any environment. And I'm not even talking about necessarily AI for control. I think we're a long way from there, frankly. But from the terms of understanding the data on the plant floor, pulling that into an AI agent and starting to derive some value or some understanding, and potentially, as we've seen, Walker and others do, using some agentic functions to, clarify that data to some degree, or compartmentalize it where it needs to, things like that, and tie that into other software applications. That's cool, and it's absolutely critical as well. But it does come down to that data. So getting to your answer, where are they applying this? Well, in brownfield applications, you're right. They're not going to rip out a working PLC on a machine, or maybe it's not in a PLC, it's some other method to connect to the machine, some other device. They're not going to yank that out and put on the new, shiny, edge device that's going to give them all this data contextualization and so on. That just doesn't make sense, and it's hard to build the ROI case for that. Not only that, but it's a huge lift, right? So what we're seeing more of course, is the use of edge technologies to layer on top of those machines. And we just recently did a case study and also featured this at ICC last September, where a tier 1 manufacturer did just that. Lots of injection molding machines of all kinds of different types, over 4 different plants across the country. And by applying, obviously we help them in this endeavor by applying some of our products to capture the important data from those machines, runtime, errors, faults, good, bad, in-feed, out-feed, all that stuff, and model and contextualize that, and got it up into ignition so they had that visibility, they had that single source of truth. Then they could start working with that data in more interesting ways. Yes, first step was understanding what was going on. So now they have dashboards, they have historians, they have a lot of information. And once they trust that data, and that's an important aspect, once they have trust in the data they're getting from these machines, then they can start taking those next steps where, okay, now we throw an MCP server on there, or we start tying this into an LLM and start letting it start to chew through some of that data that is trustworthy. The sanctity of data is its highest level. Then you can start getting some interesting outcomes.
If I may ask a follow-up and I guess expand on Dave's question a little bit and also on what you're saying, Benson, because I've been trying to, I would say, also break down some of the reasons why a manufacturer is looking to either replace their current platform or augment it with something at the edge, right? And so for
Mhm.
me, sort of AI and maybe MCPs and data falls into one category. You've mentioned cybersecurity, right? So I think like that's becoming an ever more important discussion topic.
No
And I know you've
question.
been talking about this for years, but it seems like now it's finally reaching a stage where it is becoming critical. And number three, for me at least, it's been also just modernizing for the purpose of replacing something that has become obsolete, right? So I think that yes, the
Right,
platforms will work for 30 and 40 decades if it's very good through hole components and everything's going to
right,
be nice and great, but
right.
ultimately certain OEMs are not going to support that hardware and will quite frankly refuse to either update the firmware or simply will not sell you parts, right? And that just becomes an exponential expense. So I guess like I'm curious, like are those the three main buckets? How do you maybe what do you see on the market in terms of those three? And if there's many, I'm also very curious again as I'm putting my thoughts together of those reasons as well.
Yeah, getting to your point about of a replacement, if
Mhm.
it's a machine, or let's even say it's just we'll keep it simple. It's a PLC that's no longer supported. Okay.
Mhm.
Now, of course, you're going to evaluate other technologies that are going to allow you to get that machine running again, based on some modern technologies, and that's where we always caution our customers, our integrators, and so on, that don't let complexity take over, and that's part of the problem. Is that stack, that ICS stack, if you will, the industrial control system stack, tends to get unwieldy. There's a whole bunch of bolt on or connect pieces you got to stitch together to achieve that desired result. Maybe it's getting data out, maybe it's applying cybersecurity. There's all kinds of gizmos you can do there. And so we think that there's a lot of ways to compress or flatten that ICS tech stack into something that will do what you need it to do, for the past, for the controls of the machine, let's say, but also to enable this notion of data democratization, and at the same time providing those cybersecurity principles that are important. One of them, the biggest one, is network segmentation. So those are the kind of things that we try to help our customers understand. And I kind of do put them in two buckets, or three. There's controls. You've got, at the end of the day, that thing has got to be a totally solid 100% uptime PLC.
Yep.
Secondary to that, you've got to provide some degree of security on that system, whether it's account-based security, it's segmented networks, it's things like that. And then third, how do you take the data that you're collecting from that's in this machine's, say, control program, and democratize that to upstream applications that can do something interesting with it? Maybe it's all the way up to AI. Maybe it's only up to the SCADA layer, or anywhere in between, databases, historians, the list goes on. But you have to make that easy as possible, using open technologies, OPC-UA, MQTT, REST APIs, you name it. So I don't know if I'm answering your question exactly as you'd hoped, but that's essentially what we see customers going on a path, especially those that are replacing equipment. They don't want to do things the same old way they've done in the past. They want to understand what kind of technologies they should be providing that's going to unleash, one, innovation on the plant floor, two, the value of that data to upstream applications so they can run their plants better.
Yeah, and look, at the end of the day, I think it is an important discussion to keep having, I would say, in our industry, right? Because even I, like I said, in some of the conversations, will usually have a discovery call where I will find out that the specific manufacturer is very focused on, again, revamping their infrastructure for cybersecurity first purposes,
Hmm.
right? There's going to
Right,
be others who will prioritize data more. There's going to be
right.
others that simply, like, well, we have this old machine. It's again, maybe it was not even on a proper control system. It was written in C sharp. We would like to figure out, can we get a proper PLC that will be, as you said, capable of running 24/7, 365 without interruption, that then the techs can troubleshoot and modify and add sensors to from that specific machine. So I think it's just important, like I said, at least for me as Vlad, to keep thinking about what are some of these buckets, what
Yeah.
to prioritize in the conversations, and how also, an OEM or a manufacturer basically of a control system also articulate some of those thoughts.
So back to Dave's question or comment
Yep.
earlier as well. The reality is that in today's world, these technologies exist to cover all three of those. And not just by Opto. I mean, there's others as well. I mean, I'm big fans of PLC Next. Yeah, naturally they're a competitor, but I love those guys over there. They have the same frame of mind as what we're trying to do, and they just provide the tools, right? The tools that allow them to tackle each of those three areas in their own way, but in a easily manageable system that they can maintain over the long term, that they know is going to be reliable and continue working. So, naturally, we think we've cracked that egg, and our customers believe so too. And we've had a lot of success with these platforms that we're doing to address those three things: cybersecurity, certainly data democratization, and standard controls and I/O.
Absolutely. I guess Vlad gets to ask most of the cybersecurity questions, Benson. So I'm going to go ask a cybersecurity question while I have the chance. So I get to ask at least one in calendar year 2026. You had mentioned cybersecurity. I feel like every time we bring you on, Benson, we talk a little bit about cybersecurity, in part because you have to go set your username and password when you've got a new Opto, right? Like if you want it to be admin and password, you have to physically go through the painful process of setting admin and password. We don't want to know how many Opto devices currently can be run and were set as admin. Exactly. Are you seeing more groups, more organizations either demand that from the end user side? Are you seeing more hardware vendors understand the need for cybersecurity and kind of build and bake some of that cybersecurity in, as Opto has been doing for at least the last decade?
Absolutely, on both counts. Naturally, you're going to get it from the IT team, right? Because let's think about this for a minute. I've got a device. It's a PLC or a remote IO system. Doesn't matter. It's some device. And I need to put it on the plant network. Guess where I got to go? Probably to IT. And guess what my next question is going to be to IT? Hey, can you get me a static IP for that thing? And right away, IT is the department of no, and for a good reason. And that reason is because as soon as you ask them for an IP address, you've just given that person permission to put a device on the network that IT is responsible for. They're the ones that now have to figure out how to secure this device. So ultimately, availability and security is generally been in the realm of IT, but today that availability has always been a core function of OT, but now the security of those devices is also critical. So yes, from end users, certainly from OEMs and system integrators, they want to know that the tools are available, that they can apply those cybersecurity principles best they can. And that comes in a wide-ranging things. And let me be clear, cybersecurity is not a product. In fact, it's not even a feature on a product. Cybersecurity is a process. It changes every day. The goalposts are moving every minute. So, there's a lot of different aspects to cybersecurity. It's trying to get some of those core fundamental things tackled first. Admin password. Let's nail that one right now. Don't do it. But the other thing is, backdoors. You do not want to have backdoors, default passwords or open ports that somebody can attack, provide an attack vector to these systems. But then, the other part is the auditing and the accounting. So we know who logged into a system under what credentials. We know that we're also protecting downstream systems that don't have these technologies built in. That old Slick 500, hey, great product, don't get me wrong, but it's wide open. If somebody gains access to that network, they start hitting it on, the EIP port. If it happens to be on Ethernet, boom, that thing's going to start responding. That's a big problem. And those systems have been around long enough. They never even were considered, cybersecurity devices. They're never intended to be that. So that's why it becomes important to protect them at some level. So all we're saying is like, well, if you're going to protect them, let's do a couple of other things as well. Let's protect them and let's get the data out of them and upstream and so on. And then if you're going to replace a PLC, well, we can do that too. But that's a modernization effort. And getting back to our earlier questions, are people ready for that? I think it's very specific to what it is they're trying to accomplish. If it's a brownfield environment, maybe less so. Greenfield, a lot of success there. Naturally we compete against Rockwells and Siemens, but there's no question that companies are seeing that the advantage of being able to conquer many of these obstacles with a single platform.
Let me ask you a question again, maybe to follow up on the people side.
Mhm.
When you mentioned IT owning these, I would say predominantly OT devices, do you see them handle pretty much everything on that side, or do you see more like ICS engineers and sort of teams step in
Well,
and do the management? Mhm.
we are absolutely seeing more of that. And why? Because OT engineers are now recognizing how important it is to have some of those basic fundamentals about networking, about cybersecurity, largely due to your work, Vlad, where you produce material to help people understand simple concepts like IP addressing. You'd still be surprised how many people we run into on the OT side that really don't know a lot about even Ethernet networking. And that's okay. That's okay. There's plenty of resources to learn about that. And you really have to, you don't even have to step out of your own home. Your own home has, IP networks and so on. But that's therein lies also the challenge is there's not enough of them there. So that's why I applaud the efforts of folks like Josh Bargis. I mean, he
Yep.
does a remarkable job of trying to illustrate and teach the important aspects of applying networks properly in an ICS environment and then bridging those off from traditional IT networks. But getting back to the question, I mean, there's still a lot of flat networks out there, right? And a lot of people don't even understand the notion of a managed switch, right? Or how
Yep.
to set up
Yep.
VLANs and all that. And those are advanced topics for OT folks. But again, thanks to Josh and the work you're doing and many others, that process is changing. So the idea is to get away from saying, "Oh yeah, OT doesn't necessarily own the devices." I want to be clear about that. But what you've done when you ask to get on their network is you've shifted the responsibility of securing those devices to them. That's what they hate. They really don't want to own the devices, but
Yeah, and it's a challenge, right? I think again, I used to be surprised by those
Mhm.
fundamental questions. I since again like have created some materials because I think that just pointing certain engineers, I would say, to those resources has become easier, at least for me, because I have noticed again, and I think it's important to recognize that there's a very large body of knowledge for a control systems
Mhm.
engineer or manager for that matter that needs to be, not only control systems, usually process, usually some mechanical design. So it is difficult, and you could essentially build a career in each one of those
Yeah.
modules. Right. So to just throw, let's say, networking, right? Basic networking, right? We're not talking about creating the full architecture, but on top of that, also some best practices on the cybersecurity side is pretty difficult. But I see more and more, especially larger companies, starting to have that role, right? It's kind of like IT OT bridge, or it could be OT
Yes.
cybersecurity, again, depending on the size. But it's still the lines are blurred, right? And IT sometimes
Yeah.
owns, let's say, the laptops and the machines that will be
Right.
accessing some of those devices, while OT, again, to a better or worse, needs to make sure that the lines and production keeps going. So it's a very challenging, I would say, balance between the two groups.
Yeah, but knowing that, if you do embark on that challenge, there's, as you said, there's a lot of resources out there, and ultimately it's going to pay off for you in the long run because it's not going to get easier or less of this notion of internetworking between these systems. It's going to be more as the thirst for trustful data is required by the organization. You're going to have to be able to architect these systems in a way that achieves those results, and you have to understand them to some degree.
Yep.
But like I said, it's not a big challenge. It's just a step you have to take.
Yeah, and I would say from a corporate standpoint, it's no longer going to be an option, right? Because we have legislation that will be to an extent punitive
Hmm.
if you were to get ransomware, right? And so
Right.
you will have to have a policy in place. You will have to have certain protocols. You will have to have, a person that is assigned to ownership of your cybersecurity best practices on the plant floor, right? Not just at the IT level. So I don't believe that it is no longer optional as it may have been in at least some people's eyes over the last few decades.
Mhm.
I don't think it's going to be optional anymore. So
I agree with you. I agree.
let me ask you
I
a
mean, you
question.
still got air gap, right?
Yes, that is always I mean, yes, you could have a flat network and fully air gapped, but again, even then you still
Nothing is
risk
truly air gap. Yeah,
exactly. Someone's going to plug in their phone or their laptop. They need to maintain the equipment with,
yeah,
IT mandate laptops, maybe not always possible. So, but anyways, that's a whole other train
right,
of thought. I'm sure we could talk about cybersecurity for an entire month, which we have in the past.
right.
Just the axe next to the trunk cable in case of attack. Just go ahead and hack through that, guys.
Yep,
Yes.
yep.
That might actually be better than cybersecurity of some of the facilities we've all been to.
Let me ask you, Benson. Oh, go ahead. Go ahead.
Oh, I was only going to say, cybersecurity. We've been talking a lot about networking here, but there's a lot of other elements, and once a network's in place,
Mhm.
you still what is the access, right? And that's got to occur over secure protocols, for sure. And that's important, especially as we start to dance back to that other subject we mentioned about AI. You're going to want to make sure that any of those connections are only authorized to
Mhm.
certain, whether individuals or applications, and you have to be able to manage that access. So, cybersecurity has a lot of different layers, that physical networking layer on up to access control, and certainly that audit trail.
Mhm. Yeah, I also have some comments on the AI side, but it's still I would say like some of those are under NDA and early conversations on how people
Vlad,
are
it's only
deploying
a
on-prem.
75-minute show, my man.
Yes.
At some
Let me
point,
move on.
we'll sit you down and ask all of your
Yes.
thoughts on AI
Good.
for the extended manufacturing hub after dark.
Right.
Yes, let
There
me
you go.
ask Benson. I do have a question for you. When it comes to innovation on the hardware side, what are you seeing? And I would like to also bundle firmware that runs on that hardware
Mhm.
into that question because it's not only about obviously the enclosure and sort of the ports, but in terms of systems being innovated on when it comes to that hardware.
Yeah, that's a terrific question, and one that we've pondered, deeply over the
Mhm.
past 2 decades, really. Our world, the world of PLCs and controllers and I/O, have largely revolved around this notion of what's called an RTOS, a
Mhm.
real-time operating system, and that could be an off-the-shelf RTOS, but many of them were proprietary. Even ours on some of our older products were proprietary RTOSs. And that was largely because of the absence of a real-time operating system. Like you wouldn't put Windows on a PLC. I would hope not.
Mhm.
But, the world kind of changed in, I think it was 91 when Linus Torvald was putting together the Linux operating system. And even then it took, a good 15 years before we got to a point to where we had an OS that we could trust, that was open and could be applied in some of the environments that we're seeing now. So, we made that. The answer to your question is it does start at the OS, right? So, if
Mhm.
the operating system of these devices permit this kind of functionality, it allows us to do some very interesting things. Certainly, create that initial security profile, which is we've already, we talked about that, but also that it gives you, a canvas to, really create some interesting amalgamation of software and capabilities on a given device. And that's where I think we've seen most of
Hmm.
the modernization on a hardware on the control side. It kind of started there. We're not the only ones. Yeah, we launched our first Linux-based device back in 2013. 2018 came out with the Epic, 2020 the Rio, all of them based on the Linux with real-time extensions. And now a lot of others are doing it. We're seeing it all over the place. And it also facilitates some interesting ideas with the idea, again, this notion of software. If I have software that can be compiled, say to a Debian flavor version of Linux, I can start running it on these edge devices. I can do containerization. I can download CodeSys and run it in a container, or I can run it right at the OS level. But so that's really been kind of that important piece. And it was really a watershed moment for us as well as we transitioned from those proprietary RTOSs to something that was open and expandable, and let us do a lot of new, interesting things. So I think that's where the innovation really started. And, we've seen it, and we've had a lot of success with it. Other companies, the aforementioned, Phoenix and many others have embraced that idea as well. We're even seeing some of the big guys do this as well. So that's kind of where it started. And then once you're there, and I'm actually going to throw back an analogy. Remember the last time we talked a lot about Ethernet networking. We came out with an Ethernet product in the mid 90s when most people told us we were completely out of our minds, that Ethernet would never make it to the plant floor. But the reason we did that was to solve a problem of interoperability and communications over a shared physical medium, in this case, Cat5, 10 base T, whatever. And by having that protocol stack on top, which you could almost say is like the operating system of the network, TCP/IP, allowed us to start doing some really interesting things. And we're kind of seeing that same thing over on the OS level. Now that we got the OS, we can start doing some interesting things with software. We can run a lot of different applications. And you guys have heard me say this before. It's an analogy I've used before. We all had flip phones, right? They were terrific for making a phone call and maybe sending an occasional text if you could figure out which key to press to get the letter you wanted. But they were very, very good at that. Same as PLCs were very, very good at what they did. But today, the world is about this notion of smartphones, and all of us have them. They're incredible pieces of hardware, and they have operating systems, whether it's Android or iOS, not really whether they're open or not in the iOS side. But the point is it allows me to run a lot of interesting software applications or apps based on what it is I want to do. And so that's kind of a modernization we're seeing as well. Now, whether those apps come in the form of containers or they come in form of the firmware itself, where it's baked in and tested against all of the other applications that are on that device, whatever path you decide to take, it gives you incredible amount of functionality, and it's on an edge device. So we're pushing some of this edge compute right down to where the signals come in the first place. That moment when we move from the real world to the digital world, from 4 to 20s to digital 1s and 0s, right? So that's where we see most of this happening. And we're now starting to see the same, and I'll let you ask questions about that, but we're starting to see the same as well with even digital comms. You have traditional IO, which will always be there, 4 to 20, 0 to 10, discrete AC input, all that stuff. But we're also seeing kind of even a bit of a resurgence in digital comms. HART's been around forever, but not everybody used it. But we're seeing a little bit more of that, and certainly other technologies we've seen like iLink or whatever, which is taking that sensor data and putting on digital comms before they get to a device. So again, a lot of it's software.
Dave, thoughts, comments?
I always find it interesting, Benson, whenever we go and bring up some of these digital comms, et cetera, how it sometimes will be sometimes will be a listener's first time hearing about hardware, first time hearing about IO-Link. I guess for me personally, the first time of someone hearing about IO-Link in 2026 is just wild in the fact that it's not, 2005, and we're talking about IO-Link. And so it is good. I guess I view these as like foundational pieces to Industry 4.0, or foundational pieces to any sort of digital transformation sort of scheme, especially if you're attempting to go do it at scale. And so I'm always happy to go ahead and bring those up and hear about that. I do want to talk about the product conversations, right? So we're talking about hardware. We've talked a lot about the software and the importance of software that lives on the new versions of hardware, so that we can go deploy this hardware out into industry, so that we can go collect the data and hopefully send that data to a place that we can go make industrial AI style decisions. What are the product conversations that you're having that kind of lead into these various hardware decisions? And I guess I'd love to know what you guys are talking a little bit about internally at Opto, or in the greater group that I imagine you guys have on the hardware side, and like how those conversations relate and translate to the end users, and what they're looking for now, and maybe what they care about in the future.
And it's a great question. It just so happens that's my primary role here at Opto, is to talk to customers, understand what their challenges are, what kind of roadblocks or obstacles have they encountered, or what kind of narrow alley or corner have they gotten stuck in the past, and how do they make sure that doesn't happen again. So I'm having these conversations all the time. The primary thing that we hear more than anything is around data. We've touched on it a little bit before. You hear me using the term data democratization all the time, which is just an easier way of saying, the right people can get the right data, and you don't have to code, you don't have to go ask for it. It's just available. So you had an earlier podcast where you talked about data transparency, data availability, and data integration. Those three things really sum up what data democratization is, and it's the number one thing that we're hearing from our customers. I have this application, or I have this task I need to do. How do I get the data from these systems into there in a simple, manageable way with context? Whether it's modeled, whether it's UDT, it doesn't really matter. But it's data that is useful and is truthful, something I can trust. That's probably the top conversation we've had, and we got a lot of experience there. You guys, I've told you before, we were one of the founding companies for OPC back in the 90s, because that's what we were trying to do. We were trying to unleash the data from manufacturing systems. At that time, it was to a Windows-based system, which is why Microsoft underwrote most of that effort. But today, that's different. But the concept is still the same. How do we unleash this data? And of course, that's comes in different transport mechanisms: OPC, MQTT, REST APIs. They're all there, and we support them all. But sometimes that's not enough. It's not just about the transport. It's what's being transported. What does that data look like? So we try to focus a lot on providing the tools that are going to help them add that kind of level of context. And the context is more than just the engineering units of a particular value, a tag value pair. It's way more than that. And being able to do that at the edge, so as it finds its way upstream, applications can use it right away. And I'm talking about applications, we don't always see on the plant floor. We've got a guy in Morro Bay who's been doing remarkable work with tools like Grafana and Influx. Tools you don't necessarily always see in the OT arena, but because these systems can expose their data in a meaningful way, he can start using some of these tools to solve problems for the company he works for. And that's super exciting for us. And so a lot of our focus is there. And then the other part of that which you don't really consider outright is the beauty of that is it absolutely abhors the notion of vendor lock-in. If I can have all of these different types of systems speak in open and communicative ways with context, that means I'm not tied to a single vendor or a single proprietary mechanism for moving the data around. It gives me a lot of choices. So that's another real, our customers or integrators will say, hey, I want to use this application. Next guy says, I want to use this application, or I need to land the data in the cloud. And I'm like, no, I'm never going to the cloud. I only want on-prem. Either way, those underlying open technologies for moving that data and contextualizing it is critical, so they can make adjustments. Once they have the hardware in and they get it the way they want it, they can make whatever adjustments at the northbound level to achieve their desired result. And that's what I love about MQTT, is because I can push that data to one place, or multiple brokers, doesn't really matter. I'm putting it to an essential repository. I'm not going to call it a UNS, it's just a broker. And it allows others to come in and get that data, all contextualized, all with true meaning, whatever application that might be. So that's one of the cool things about using open source technologies, is it does avoid that kind of vendor lock-in. Hey, you may love our stuff and it does everything you want it to do, and another day you want to switch to somebody else. As long as they're supporting those open technologies, you should be able to do that. And that's been an important part of what we're trying to accomplish here at Opto. And then the last one that kind of ties all those pieces together is the notion of manageability. So often I see some technologies that are coming out, cool stuff, but it takes somebody with a lot of IT experience, or say database experience, or whatever, to actually make use of. And our big thing is like we build these tools for OT, so they have to be manageable. You have to be able to use interfaces that OT can understand. Think of it. I don't want to jump back to cybersecurity, but just the notion of certificates, dealing with certificates, that's just something you have to do. So we try to make it really easy for you to deal with those kind of things, or connecting to a broker, or making your data available via OPC. Provide the tools that allow OT to set these things up and manage them over the long term. So those are a couple of the big ones there.
Let me ask you, Benson, a question as a follow-up on the protocol side, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think that our industry in a general or broader sense is notorious for having a variety of different tools and options when it comes to protocols. I
Yep.
am curious, because in some instances, I would say that less is perhaps more, right? But it obviously depends on the use case. It obviously
It does.
depends on what they're trying to build. I'm wondering if you do see maybe a world or a reality where some of this converges, right? Is it,
Mm-hmm.
at least in my opinion, again, a lot of the protocols, you show up to a manufacturing site and they obviously have their own preference, and you as the integrator just simply have to roll with the punches, so to speak, and make sure that it works with their preference. But
Mm-hmm.
for, I would say, and again, obviously there's probably a percentage point there, but 80% of the use cases can be accomplished with a variety of different tools and options. And there's going to be
Right.
some edge cases. But I guess I'm
Absolutely.
curious if you see, yeah, I'm curious if you see a convergence, or do you see us continuing going down this path where it's just so many different protocols and they will all continue to exist depending on the vertical, depending on the manufacturer. And similar, I guess, like to Ethernet, right? You mentioned that
Yeah.
earlier on. I'm curious if there will be this maybe better protocol in your eyes that is worth, I guess, implementing over the others.
Yeah, and the answer really does come down to who's using it, right? So it depends on where you are in the tech stack. So there's a huge following of folks that down at a instrument level love EtherCAT, right? So
Hmm.
that's a protocol, runs over Ethernet, and the next layer up, probably more at a machine control level, we're seeing we've seen OPC UA in particular. And then maybe the next layer up, you're seeing where MQTT has a really nice fit. And then you can kind of branch off from there, and we've got developers who want to use REST APIs, right, and make
Yep.
calls.
Mhm.
And that ends up being really important if we want to start to integrate AI, because AI can actually deal really well with REST APIs. Not so much with OPC or certainly something as low level as EtherCAT. But the point is, it really depends on where you are in that stack for which protocols fit. So the idea is, how many of them can you support and support elegantly based on how it's going to be applied. I would say we're seeing less of a convergence, for example, and I don't have strong feelings on this, but OPC over MQTT, classic example of trying to converge the two. And frankly, I think that you don't really need to do it that way, but I understand because of the information model and so on in OPC, to be able to publish that data is great. But will we see the continued convergence like that? I'm not really sure, because they're
Hmm.
really set up for different use cases and they work beautifully together anyway. Everybody's in this camp of OPC versus MQTT, and I think that's a false narrative. They work wonderfully together, and they're ideal for given tasks. So yeah, I'm not sure. To answer your question, how much convergence will we see? I think we'll see some other, certainly the proprietary stuff kind of fall by the wayside, and there's plenty of them, and some of them are actually in use. I won't name them because I think they're going to die a slow death. But the bottom line is, rather than convergence, I think we'll see some just simply rise to the top.
Yeah,
I think Vlad
for
is
sure.
really hoping that you'll say yes, because that would make the answer to the question really easy, Benson. But I think for all of the reasons that you brought up, we will continue to see many protocols. I don't think it will be possible at any point in the near future to go converge all of those, even because if we manage to converge all of the new protocols starting today, we still have dozens or many
Absolutely.
dozens of protocols. And Vlad knows that a PLC is good for like what, 50, 60 years.
Something like
you
that.
just put it on the plant floor and keep it running.
Yep.
Right.
Benson, I do want to ask you a bit about ProveIt. I
Okay.
feel like it's good that we ask you a bit about ProveIt because you have gone first, first person first at ProveIt in Dallas last year. First person, of course, at ProveIt at ICC.
Yep.
And of course, you are going first. I think the saying at ProveIt is save the best for first and just let Benson go. So I'd love to get kind of your quick thoughts on ProveIt, maybe things that you're excited about in relation to this year versus the previous ProveIt sessions you've done.
Yeah, so we'll start with the first part of your question, or your first comment about going first. I don't want to speak for Walker, but I think I understand where he's coming from. And we've already discussed it on this podcast. And that is the sanctity of the data, right? It starts somewhere. Connect, collect, store. Those are the primary things you have to do first. And that's what we do. Our role in the large tech stack and the value chain of Industry 4.0 is at the edge. So our ability to collect this data and put it in a format that upstream systems can understand, which includes tying that into the UNS. So it's kind of where other applications get built upon is the operational data that we can collect. So I think more than anything, it isn't about being better or anything. I think it's more about setting the foundation for if you're going to build a digital transformation approach to your business or build this type of platform, you better really focus on getting the right data and data you can trust. And it's modeled, contextualized, all the things I keep saying. So I think that's why. And we love the idea. We're going to do the same thing this year. So I'll give you a little sneak peek of what we've got on tap. And I'll put it in context of what we did last year. We're focused on a single virtual factory last year. So we focused more on collecting data from ancillary systems, utility, compressors, air dryer, electrical panels, stuff that support the manufacturing environment, which included the presses, the slitters, and so on. We'll do something similar with Enterprise A, which of course in this case is a single site glass jar manufacturer. So we'll focus on that. And what made that fun, and I've always said I should get a shirt that says no sim with a big line through it, because we try not to do much with simulated tags. So in the case of Enterprise A that we'll do again this year, is we'll be publishing data, not simulated data, but actually data from our own factory here in Temecula, where we do have to provide clean power and dry compressed air and so on. So the data you'll see landing in the UNS at ProveIt for Enterprise A will be from this building. For Enterprise B, we're really going on a limb here. We're working with a couple folks. One is including Dylan. We still got a lot of work to do, so I hope it comes to fruition. But that's going to be more of a supply chain integration. So think about Enterprise B is a multi-site beverage manufacturing facility. They basically make orange soda and cola, and then they distribute that to their customers. But the operation is the bottling of that, the palletizing, and so on. We're going to try to take a supply chain integration with convenience stores for that one. So that'll be kind of fun. And then Enterprise C for ProveIt this year is a life sciences application. This is in the biotech arena. So you have a bioreactor, a chromatograph, you'll have a media prep area and so on, and which is terrific. But in any biotech environment, you've got GMP practices that you have to follow. Maybe the 21 CFR Part 11. In other words, there's a lot of other data that you need, particularly relative to the environment that your bioreactor and other elements of this process operate under, because that has to be logged and audited and reported. So in the same vein, we're taking a part of our building, which we, obviously use Opto controls for our own stuff here. We dog food everything we do. And we've taken a portion of our building and made it the Enterprise C. And we'll be reporting data like temperature, humidity, air quality, and so on, and publishing that to the UNS so that the biotech enterprise facility has a bigger picture, a fuller picture of what their operations are, particularly for things like reporting and so on. So you heard it here first. There's a little tip off to what we have planned. a little bit audacious. We are, repetitive overachievers, I guess. I don't know, but that's what we're hoping to show off at ProveIt.
I love it. It will be very interesting with 3 virtual factories. How many people try to get to all 3 virtual factories, especially if they try to present all 3 virtual factories in an approximately 40-minute session. That anyone who can do that successfully is absolutely going to be an overachiever. Speaking of overachievers, Vlad, do you have any ProveIt questions? Any last ProveIt questions for Benson before we jump to the final questions?
No, I'm looking forward to it. I think it's going to be a really interesting demo. I'm sure it's going to be very polished and intricate. So, I know how much that takes.
No pressure.
So hopefully we can get Benson back into building mode, and we'll see what's to come in a couple of weeks.
Absolutely. Benson, this has been absolutely awesome. Thank you so much for joining us. And everyone, thank you so much for listening. We haven't gotten a bunch of LinkedIn questions that have come through the chat. Sometimes chat doesn't work, guys. So we will do our very best to get to the questions on the backside of this in the chat. Benson, I do want to ask you the last questions that we get to ask everyone at the end. And for our new-ish listeners, the first one is one of my favorites because I get to go ask our listeners to go predict the future. So Benson, what do you think the future of AI looks like in the manufacturing environment in the next 3 to 5 years?
So I've got a number of thoughts on this, and frankly, they tend to shift and change a little bit each day because every day we're seeing something new happening in AI. But where we see the real value is helping folks accomplish their tasks. So we're not talking about AI to, again, to do control and maybe write a little code, but really to help them overcome some of the obstacles as they're building these systems. I actually used AI for part of the enterprise, part of the virtual factories. I had a question about, well, what if I did this, and what does this look like? And it was pretty helpful, but it also sent me down a pretty deep rabbit hole before I realized, oh my gosh, I'm in a rabbit hole. I got to get out of here and get stuff done. So that's something you got to be careful about. Yep. But at the end of the day, I think that's where it's going to have a lot of value. Now, the issue there is in the industrial arena, a lot of the information that you need, let's say it's, how to build a UDT in ignition, or how to configure a 4 to 20 signal to do XYZ. There's not a lot of that information that currently exists in LLMs, right? So that's where the hallucination factor starts to roar in. But if I were to predict the future, I think you're going to see companies like Opto and others focus on tools that help customers get their jobs done. Answer some questions, lead them on a path, and hopefully get them over those obstacles. So I always believe that, I continue to believe that AI is an accelerator to us, not a replacement for us. I don't see AI generating PLC programs. Yes, it will, but is that something you really want to do? I think having a human involved, regardless of the AI task, I don't care if you're writing a blog post or a letter to grandma. If you're using AI, terrific, but it's got to have the human element on it. Otherwise, I think we're all going to be disappointed with the outcomes. So really, as a lever to accelerate our jobs and allow us to get more things done, and hopefully less time, and give us new ideas, things that we hadn't thought of before. That's where I see that happening. But I don't see us getting to a point, at least not in the near term, where AI is making those decisions, particularly at a plant floor level.
Absolutely. I feel like we've all gone down those rabbit holes, and where AI exceptionally confidently gives you the worst answer possible. And you can only have so many of those happening on live running machines until the machines aren't live and running anymore. So I would agree. Hopefully it becomes an accelerator on the plant floor in the nearest future. I'm not worried about ChatGPT taking over Vlad's job at any point soon.
And if I can offer a tip on AI real quick, there is and I'll just use ChatGPT as an example. There is a prompt in your profile that you can put in there that kind of gives there's a number of different things you put in there, like what you do and whatnot. But there is a prompt that you want to be applied to every response. And in mine, it says, be direct, concise and ruthless. Don't sugarcoat anything, and certainly don't blow you know what up my know what you know what. And I put that right in there. And I got to tell you, I think I picked it up from somebody on YouTube or whatever. It really did change the relationship I had with AI. Instead of it always, puffing me up or, hallucinating or saying a whole bunch of words that really don't mean something, it did change my relationship. So, hot tip for you. Focus on a
Interesting.
prompt in there. It says, this is how I want you to respond. And it should be ruthless. It should be concise. It should be brief. And you can ask it to tell you the truth, but good luck with that.
Absolutely. The truth factor is what's always a bit concerning sometimes. Oh, Benson, we want to ask you for some career advice. So if someone is early to mid-career or maybe looking to get deeper on the industrial side, what's the best career advice that you have for them, please?
Yeah. So if I can steal a Ted Lasso line, be curious. And if you know the scene, it's a terrific scene, but be curious. And what do I mean by that? I mean that always be learning, right? And it's tinkering, it's exploring, it's learning every day. I think that's the best career advice I can give anybody is the world is rapidly changing, no question. Find your niche for sure. Find the thing that really interests you. And because if it does interest you and you're excited about it, you will by default be curious on how to be better and so on. So to me, it's still, dare I say the term, it's fiddle farting around, trying to figure out this and that and how these technologies, YouTube's a great resource and whatnot, but it's really building that base set of knowledge that's going to help you go tackle problems as you move up through your career. No management advice from me. We're a very flat organization here. There are no management layers, so I can't certainly dish out any.
I love that, Benson, VP of Product Strategy. No management advice. No, that's fantastic. Benson, do you have a book recommendation for us today, please?
Yeah, I'm going to cheat on this one, guys. Yeah, I am reading. There's a couple books I'm reading right now. One is called Traction, about the entrepreneurial operating system. Interesting, but I decided I'm not going to. That won't be my pitch. My pitch is a highly anticipated book that's coming out in a couple weeks, and it's called The Phantom Pallet. And it's a story of a manufacturing fable about data, trust, and transformation. And why this book? Because it's written none other by Dylan Dufresne. I'm sure he's been on your show. I think there's a lot of people recognize, the enormous value he brings to our industry and trying to understand all these pieces. Well, he's put the book together, and it's already like, I know it was last I looked, it was number 4 on the new on the new hit list for books on Amazon. Think about it, that's pretty remarkable. So I'm excited about that book, and that's my pitch is get the pre-order for the book called The Phantom Pallet by Dylan Dufresne on Amazon.
I love that. I think I saw within the last couple of days, Dylan talked about getting proofs of the hard paper, the hardcover books in. And then I saw this and I'm like, wait, has it somehow released? And I have just been locked in a manufacturing site so long that I have not seen that it has released yet. So that is fantastic. Everyone listening live and anyone listening in podcast form, Vlad will go ahead and put those links to at least Amazon, if not elsewhere, where you can find Dylan's book if you want to order or pre-order. Next question for you, Benson. If we could remove all physics and monetary and other constraints, we'd love to know like an interesting idea or an innovation that you'd like to see within this field.
That's what we do every day, is try to innovate every single day. What would I like to see? And you did give me this question ahead of time, and I really battled with it because I think that the rate of innovation and the things we're seeing right now is already moving at such a clip that it's hard to kind of keep up. But ultimately, it's just more accessibility to the tools and knowledge and instruction to help us get these things done every day. I know that's a lame answer. But it's, I'm not seeing any kind of, right there on the horizon or even too far down, aside from, of course, the implementation of AI that I've been super excited about. But I think there's a lot of gradual innovation happening right now. And it's always, what's around the next corner? I've got to learn that and understand how to apply it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think that we're in an interesting phase. At some point, that innovation is going to either expand extremely rapidly or contract extremely rapidly,
Right.
depending upon whichever direction we continue down the path with industrial AI, and all of the data centers that we are setting up. Benson, this has been amazing. Last question we want to ask you is, how can our listeners help? Who should reach out? Who are you looking to connect with? Kind of your open forum to ask our listeners anything.
So my favorite thing is talking to customers and integrators about the challenges that they're faced, what kind of things that they're running into, and not because I want to sell them something. That's not my role here. We got a sales team for that. It's because that feedback that comes back from real users in the field is absolute gold, and it allows us to frame up those ideas and consider things that all of us should be doing to move this industry forward. And so, if there's anything that I would ask for your listeners is drop me a line. Let me know what kind of challenges, obstacles, or maybe even successes that you've had, because it absolutely informs everything that we do here. We don't do it for the sake of technology or for the sake of doing things. We do it to solve problems, and the problems out there exist. I don't know all of them, and the way where those come from are people with boots on the ground. And so, if you're asking, that's what I would say. Give me a ring.
Absolutely, Benson. This has been fantastic. Listeners, Vlad will attest that Benson generally doesn't bite particularly hard, mostly because it's difficult to do from the opposite side of the phone screen. But Benson, this has been fantastic. Once again, thank you so much for joining. We're excited to see you in person in just a couple of short weeks at ProveIt. Listeners, again, thank you so much for coming and listening and hanging out with us, all of your questions. First and foremost, please be sure to connect with Benson. If you guys are watching on LinkedIn, which most of you are, Benson should be tagged in the post, and you guys can go ahead and connect and say hi, and chat about Opto and chat about all of those other amazing things. I mean, this is just the tip of the iceberg, I feel. We can go back and listen to all of the varying conversations that we've had with Benson. And there's been, other than a little bit of cybersecurity, there's been very little overlap from one conversation until the next. But if you have made it this far, make sure you follow Benson. Make sure you follow Vlad and myself in Manufacturing Hub so you guys can stay up to date on our episodes. We will be back next week going and diving directly into that data side and hopefully talking about some industrial AI solutions and applications over the next couple of weeks. If you guys have made it this far on podcast form, you're absolutely amazing. Please do the like and subscribe and share and follow along and all of those other things. When I ask, Vlad publishes and more people listen, which is pretty amazing.